Okay. So I want to welcome all of you to the Friday webinar series being organized by the IGROW Foundation every Friday at 5:30 p.m. In today's session, we are very lucky and fortunate to have the best minds on the housing bank, on the housing sector, on the housing finance and housing markets with us today. We are privileged and honored to have the former CMD of National Housing Bank, Mr. Verma, with us, former MD of National Housing Bank, Madam Dakshita, with us, and we have Professor Darshini Mahadevia, also who has been working on this sector for a long time from earlier CEPT and now Ahmedabad University with us. And finally, then we have Mr. Rangan with us from HDFC. He's the executive director there. All the four panelists and speakers are very well known, so I won't go into the details. Right straight away, without much ado, I'm going to invite Mr. Verma to share some thoughts with us. We are going to share 15 minutes with each speaker before we open on to question answers. So Mr. Verma, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Charan Singh. It's a pleasure to be on this forum, IGROW. And a good evening to the fellow panelists and the audience. Well, this topic, no matter how much we talk about this, we exchange views on this. This is an all-time relevant theme, the role of housing in reviving the Indian economy. This is a destination, and I think the initiatives which have been taken by the government of India, the government institutions, the market, the private sector institutions is tremendous. I would like to start my presentation with a quote from an American sociologist called Desmond Matthew. And I have been very impressed with this quote as it is relevant, my all-time favorite quote on housing. And here it goes. I start the quote. An affordable housing program is an anti-poverty effort, human capital investment, community improvement plan, and public health initiative, all rolled into one. Such is the potential of housing, and I would say such is the power of housing. Essentially, when he's saying this, he's meaning the following. One, housing is a multidimensional sector. It touches human lives, the human living, the society, the country, the nation in multiple ways. Starts off with the individual, the family, the society, the region, and the nation as a whole. It has nuances on social, economic, political, and environmental front. So there is so much to housing, and it's something which is no-brainer that with investments in housing, it's not the economy which is going to grow, it's the entire society, the nation that is going to develop. So the short point here that I'm trying to make is that investments in housing and housing activities, it's greatly beneficial to the individuals as it empowers the individual. It gives them a sense of ownership of an asset which is a house, a home, and that improves the quality of life for the individuals. It gives them emotional security, it gives them physical security. At the next level is the region where the individual is living. And if we have the activities on housing, construction activities, it brings about a huge growth in local employment generation, in local economic activities, in local revenue generation for the government, and of course, overall contribution to GDP. At the national level, when you're looking at the impact of housing, it brings about a whole host of benefits, starting off with the increasing housing stock among the people. It's an anti-poverty measure as well, which would essentially be very synonymous with the government's intent and programs on poverty alleviation. It's very coterminous with the government's intent and objective of removing poverty amongst the lowest segment of the population. So affordable housing has multiple dimensions. It touches the lives and of the people and the region and the country in more than many ways. Having said that, I would, in fact, like to dwell on a couple of things which directly relate to the Indian economy. And we have seen the journey of the housing sector, the way it has evolved over the past 30 years. And we are, in fact, at a point where the sector has grown tremendously. It has brought about stability in the financial market. That's something which is, again, very important at the national level, with investments in housing and the mortgage sector growing the way it has grown in India. It has a tremendous impact on the financial stability. It is a source of financial stability. The financial stability feeds back into housing sector, and that's we have seen in the Indian context. Though we regret to say that still the mortgage penetration in our country is far from satisfactory. It's far from where many of the developing countries in Asia Pacific region and in the developed countries in Europe and America are. We today have a mortgage penetration to the extent of just about 11 or 12% of the GDP, which is woefully low. And this is something which needs to be really taken forward, and we have to scale it up. And that's very, very important. We have seen the mortgage industry grow over a period of time, and I would think that the way I would like to present it is in terms of four pillars. Four pillars are number one, the government's policies and programs, where the government is adequately sensitized of the importance of housing and the housing sector and the way it can impact the overall growth in the economy and development of the country. So government's policies and programs are paramount, and are something which is pretty much in place. And today, housing policies are at the center of the government's overall programs and policy formulations. Second aspect is, to my mind, the institution building. The institution building and the deepening of the mortgage industry through a large number of institutions which are there today, be it the housing finance companies, which are now more than 100, though it's a very skewed sort of a growth and development. We have a large number of banks of all hues, whether the commercial banks, cooperative banks, regional rural banks, small finance banks, they're all of them into housing. So we have good volumes of funding happening in the housing sector. This is the institutional depth and this institutional reach. They have reached out to people in all segments of the population. They have reached out to all regions of the country. So it's been geographical deepening. There has been special deepening. There has been deepening amongst different segments of the population, and with focus on low and economically weaker section. That's something which is very important, where the government has played a very key and a lead role in providing a subsidy-oriented program, subsidy-oriented schemes, and using these institutions to be able to deliver the subsidy along with loan. So there's been a good partnership between the government and the housing finance market, which is the housing finance institutions and the banks, and the two together are really driving the growth in this sector. The third piece, to my mind, is the market infrastructure. Now, when you talk about housing, I think we always perceive some kind of risk. It's a long-term lending. Do we have asset liability matching? What kind of risks that are coming in? The valuation risk. There is a risk of credit risk. There's market risk, and these are actually these risks remain present over the long haul, over the long period of the mortgage, which could be 25, 30 years as well. So there is a genuine concern on the mortgage sector faced with risk, or all the time risk is staring at the lenders in some way or the other. So we have had these market infrastructure programs where gradually we have had institutions coming in to de-risk the sector, whether it's by way of developing the credit bureaus, where you have more information on the borrowers, and there is some effort through the credit bureaus on information availability across the market, across the institutions, who use this information to be able to very appropriately appraise the risk and accordingly take the decisions. Next is, say, for example, we have on default character of the individuals, of the borrowers, which is shared. And there's a good portal for information sharing amongst the lending institutions. We have the SARFAESI Act, under which SARSAI was set up. So we have information on the properties against which the loans are given and charges being created. We have state guarantee fund for trust fund for low income housing. So there has been a market infrastructure growth and development, which has given a lot of confidence to all these stakeholders, whether they are policymakers, the regulators, the lenders, the borrowers, the investors, depositors, and the international community who are also lenders. So that has reduced the risk in this sector, and it has encouraged the lending institutions to come in a much bigger way. And with that happening, I think this is been a very, very important growth story for the Indian housing finance market. The fourth piece is the funding, essentially. Last but not the least, and which is the most important source of housing activity, is the funding, both on the demand side and on the supply side. By that, I mean the demand side, that is the individual mortgages which are being created, and number two, on the supply side, which is loans to the lendings to the construction agencies, be they public housing agencies or the private sector or some kind of partnership. So we have in fact all the channels on of for financing, whether it's through the commercial banks, through housing finance institutions, through local banks. I mean, we have these small finance banks, we have the subsidy support from the government. So all these are important channels, and which together are playing an important role. So we have had the kind of growth for the institutions in India has been unparalleled, and this is something which is a great story, which the international community also recognizes, and they are, in fact, they cite the Indian example in more than many ways. We have, over and above this, the government's role on provision of housing through fiscal and budgetary support, and that's, I think, very, very important. The budgetary and fiscal support for both lenders as well as the builders, the individuals who are the borrowers, and the investors. So you have a very conducive and a friendly fiscal and budgetary regime from the government side, which is a big incentive to all who are in this game. It improves affordability, it improves robustness of the market, and it encourages the flow of funds into the sector. Apart from the fiscal and budgetary support of the government, we have the credit and monetary policy support from the Reserve Bank of India, and that has played a very key role. And that's something which is a great story again in the Indian evolution of the housing finance market, and the supportive role played by the central bank in promoting housing. All this is for the reason that all the policymakers and the regulators recognize the importance of housing in contribution to the GDP. We have a role in the development of the market. Over and above this, we have the regulatory role, and I would say the regulations of the RBI. Besides the credit and monetary policy, the regulatory support also has been immense. However, the regulator has been very, and National Housing Bank as well, they have been very particular about ensuring the stability of the credit system. They are the guardians of the credit system, and this comes to mortgage market. It has, in fact, internationally, it has internationally seen to be more risky. So the regulators have been cautious here, and they have gone about doing their job in a very, very diligent manner, which has actually been whether it's the borrowers or the depositors, the investors, for everyone. So this is the background in which we have recognized the role of the housing sector in not only reviving the economy, but ensuring the development of the nation. And that's, I think, I'll go a little beyond pure revival of the economy, but also on the development of the nation, as it has ensured greater equity of growth. In fact, distribution of growth. It has, with focus on economically weaker section, lower segment of the population and their housing, it has ensured greater developmental aspect of housing. Other than the commercial sustainability, the social development aspect is very, very important. And that's how we are driving the housing market and the mortgage industry in a manner that it offers affordable, accessible housing finance and inclusive housing. So these are important areas which are very consistent with the government's own program and the goal of providing housing for all. Now, with this, before I end, I don't know how much time I have, but a few suggestions which I thought will be very, very useful. And there, I think that, since we are getting close to 2022, which was the government's dream initiative of Housing for All by 2022. You have a couple of suggestions which I thought I'll share with you with the forum here. One is technology is becoming extremely important and critical. So we have to have housing by the numbers that we are envisaging today. Unless we do mass housing, it will not be possible. That's something which has to be promoted. And in mass housing, I think the role of public housing agencies again becomes important. Since we have the RERA today, and RERA is a Real Estate Regulatory and Development Authority, and public housing agencies are equally covered under the discipline of RERA. So there is a case for promoting the activities on the part of the public housing agencies, at least for the lower section of the population, for their housing needs. So public housing agencies need to be reactivated. We need to adopt technology from abroad. We have to have much, I would say, facilitate the transfer of technology from developed countries or where it has been tried to our country for delivering housing in mass, in quality, and in short period of time. So this is very, very important. We have to have very standardized practices across the industry in terms of originating loans. Now, in originating loans, you have the approval process, you have the due diligence on the property, on the borrowers, you look at the status of security. There has to be some kind of standardization, and I'm very happy to note that the way the mortgage securitization is now being propagated, or with the Reserve Bank's blessings and their report, I'm sure it's going to see the light of the day in a much better way. That will result in some kind of practice across the industry. We have had the difficulties in ensuring the high LTV loans for a long period of time. High LTV loans for a long period of time has inherent risk. But then with the risk mitigating measures of all kinds, both legislative and non-legislative, regulatory and promotional, all these factors coming in, there is need to grow out of this risk syndrome and try and consciously promote high long-term value LTV loans and very, very long-term lending. So that's something which has not really happened. And I would be the happiest person if our country is able to see long-term loans at 30 years. It could be fixed rate mortgages as we have abroad. And that's a big support to the people in the middle income group, to the people in the low and moderate income households. So long-term loan with high LTV where their equity is low through mortgage guarantee or through Trade Guarantee Trust Fund for Low-Income Housing. There are different kinds of instruments. So all this should be used for the purpose of providing a benefit and delivering value to the borrowers. The builders are, in fact, the other pieces where the builders have to be either incentivized or it has to be ensured that they are doing a better job. They are more disciplined. They deliver value and the price of the value of the cost which the borrowers are paying. We still continue to have n number of issues with between home buyers and the builders, and eventually all this now getting, of course, to the domain of the IBC and going to the for resolution or even for bankruptcy. So this is an area, this is still work in progress. And to my mind, this has to be given a big thrust in one way could be by way of grading the builders and grading the projects. That's something which the government should come forward, and between the government, Reserve Bank of India, and other market participants, we should have a system of grading or rating of builders and developers based on their performance. So one side we have RERA, and the other side we have the grading of builders and developers on the projects. That will generate a lot of confidence amongst the buyers of the property. So they don't have to wait for the project to be completed 90% and then come into the market to buy, which stymies the market, which stifles the market. So you need to draw in the borrowers early on for the project so that the funding also starts happening, but have a better handle on the developers and the builders. So they have to be brought under some kind of disciplining, and it started happening, but we haven't really gone that far into it. The other aspect is, of course, the valuation standards and valuation. There's some standardization of valuation. That's very, very important. And this is a discipline which is very age-old and it's archaic. I think we need to give that makeover, and that's something where we need to discipline the industry against, so that there is some uniformity across the industry in valuation of the property. Valuation is so important that it has a lot of ramifications for regulations. Now, most of the regulations say it's LTV based or valuation based, where it's the risk weights are based on the valuation eventually. So capital adequacy is also indirectly based on the valuation. So if we go wrong in valuation of the property, or if there are certain gaps, or we suspect things not being right in the valuation space, that can have a huge bearing on the regulatory parameters. So to give confidence to the regulator, I think there is need to really promote a common standards of valuation of the properties. Now, with this, I think I'd like to end here, and maybe when there are questions, or I'll get an opportunity to interact. But these measures will certainly result in better flow of funds. It will bring in more transparency across all stakeholders, and it will bring in more accountability across the stakeholders, particularly from the builder's point of view. The banks and HFCs whose lending is good today, we are standing at nearly 18 trillion INR, which is 18 lakh crores of INR in terms of total outstanding mortgage outstanding, and nearly 4 lakh crores in an annual flow of funds, which is huge. So look at the market space, but still we are at 10 to 11% of the GDP. So there is a long way to go, and I think this is the time when we need to really pause and maybe re-strategize, so that we're able to develop a critical impact on the housing sector. We have to consolidate all the gains, all the entire developments which have happened in the industry, and take them forward in a big way. I think the transaction costs and efficiency of both housing lending as well as housing construction, they are important. Transaction costs, pricing, and efficiency in lending and in construction. So these are the areas which are maybe within the space of promotion and developmental role of the National Housing Bank. And I'm sure there is enough capability built into the system to be able to really ensure this. So we are with this, I'll end. But before ending, I'd like to say that the government, the markets are well poised, the regulators are ready, and to support the government in its pursuit of its dream of housing for all by 2022. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verma. Over to Madam Dakshita Das.
Thank you, Mr. Verma. You set the tone. And because you started with a quote has suddenly come to my mind. And as the famous economist said, when facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? Very famous. Because housing is a sector which has had several iterations. And some of you who are here today, either as listeners or as co-panel, and Dr. Charan Singh in particular, are aware of the ups and downs. It's not V-shaped or U-shaped. It's just a creature which has to be constantly monitored so that the systemic risks don't creep into the economy. And why I say so is because actually the sector has got huge forward and backward linkages. I mean, at the front end, yes, it is catering to a need, but at the back end, it has a tremendous potential of crashing things. The recent times are extremely rosy for this sector. They have gone over there. The sector has overcome its demon or the liquidity crisis. It's overcome its IL&FS cracks, which had come in. The then regulator, the NHB, fast-tracked a whole lot of changes. RBI stepped in to promote a lot of liquidity. And my compliments to all the banks, because when the housing finance companies were having problems, the banks stepped in to actually keep the sector afloat. So that's why I say that what it requires is constant movement. And that way, if I may compliment some of the initiatives taken by the government, one of the most important one has been to promote PMAY urban on one side, with all the teething troubles which it has seen in terms of I can admit that when I was in NHB, then too, I had a lot of problems in setting right the software and the internal dynamics. On today's date, it's a system which is rolling, and you are catering specifically to MIG, LIG. And when we look at that, we say, what is the criticality of this growth? The criticality is that if you ever seek a heat map of the growth of the housing sector, you'll find that it's like this. The 4 metros, and that's where the concentration of housing societies are. That's where the demand is. And that's where the builders have focused their attention. Now, if we say that is the case, then what we need to see is how is it that the promoters and the various entities have overcome their problems. And that way, the housing finance companies as a group have really rallied around. And some of the instructions, which included the recognition of 51% exposure of a housing finance company to individual housing, has played a very important role. That was enforced in 2018 by NHB, recognized recently in the paper by the central bank. And that gives a tremendous fillip, because your registration of a housing finance company gets directly linked to your output on the retail housing side, which should be 51%, or you run the risk of losing your license altogether. Now, as I can say, it's a very rosy picture. COVID has hit everyone very badly, but not the housing sector. Yesterday's news report said that a lot of the stock is going to get picked up. Yesterday's report also said that in a couple of years, we'll be touching a 15% benchmark of growth. RERA is in its place. 2 states have avidly, that is Maharashtra and Karnataka, have very keenly stepped in and seen a robust growth. I read an interview of the LIC chairman where he spoke about his own baby company, which is LIC Housing Finance, getting unprecedented requirement and requests. So what has happened is that the sector is showing trends. So now again, we are seeing a hand-holding between the two, that is the public sector banks as well as the housing finance companies, and co-origination of loans. Permitting of co-origination of loans has played a significant role in this. Finally, we have come to realize that the marriage between the two funding agencies has to be there, because this marriage delivers results at the ground. And I'm sure it will. Because another thing which we are getting to here is that people are wanting to move into ready to move in apartments. So the old stock which was lying, with all the liquidity that is available, and again, with a huge amount of policy interventions, some of which Mr. Verma has mentioned, if I can repeat, one of them, most important, was the slashing of the GST rate. Then we also had RBI's intervention in terms of the various funds, the public credit guarantee scheme, the Swami fund, a whole lot of interventions have happened. So my thing is that if I look at the future or I look at the now, the system is stable, the housing finance companies are stable, the regulatory functions are now with the RBI and leaving NHB free to come out with extremely dynamic schemes such as the LIFT, which takes care of a lot of last mile funding issues for the housing finance companies for stalled project. Also, NHB has been lending aggressively with relaxation for its liquidity requirement and its debt equity ratio by the central bank. So right now the stage is set. So if the stage is set, what we are possibly going to see is home loan sanctions increasing. Already October, December numbers indicate that home loan sanctions by HFCs in this period was about 137% of the copy, or that is October to December 19. Home loan disbursements in the same period was 123% up over a similar period. As I said, the inventory of unsold stock of houses has been reduced to the lowest in the last 8 years. Mind you, it means that housing is there. Housing has reached and housing has reacted to all the policy interventions, including actually Vermaji for the mortgage market. Because one of the cracks we felt in 2018 was the overexposure to mortgage and also the overexposure to the commercial paper. Those are things which have been, housing finance companies are aware that they need to tread carefully in that direction. As I've said, PMAY CLSS is a great game changer, and Ranganji will talk about it because HDFC is actually led from the front in trying to ensure ready and speedy funding in this direction. And one very important index, one which is not perhaps read much, but which is very critical, is the Residex, which is published by the government. And that actually gives the housing trends. When I had a look at the last report, I'm not privy as yet to the final report. My sense is that yes, things are picking up well. And with that, Dr. Charan Singh, I hand over to Darshini ji, and I'll wait for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Dakshita. Professor Darshini, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Charan Singh. When you asked me to be part of this panel, I was wondering that amidst the stalwarts of the banking sector, what am I doing? Because I do agree with the previous two speakers, Vermaji and Dakshita ji, that there has been an significant initiatives taken in the housing sector. If we go back about 15 years back, there were very few. At the national level, there was nothing so to say about urban housing. I mean, I work in urban housing, so I'm going to limit my discussion on that. There was nothing. First thing that came up was BSUP, where also in the initial years, we did not have much of clarity about what that component was supposed to be as a part of JNNURM. And then after a while, I think a year or so, it became clear that it could be either services or it could be housing. And then one started on the housing path at that time and building large number of low-income housing in Indian cities. The PMAY has scaled up that efforts and has diversified the portfolio of housing schemes within that. So what I'm going to speak, because I think I learned a lot on what initiatives have taken from the banking sector side with all the instruments. But what I'm going to I'm going to say is from the bottom, what happens at the city level, because finally, even if we have systems put in place at the top, what we need is its implementation at the bottom. If we look at, and so that's where I'm going to sort of link the banking sector initiatives with what happens at the grassroots level and ground level. Now, in the PMAY, which is really, it has 4 components, which are very interestingly put. That one is the credit link subsidy scheme, which I think Dakshita ji said that it's really taken off. But the data shows that what is taken off more is the beneficiary-led component, BLC component, which has taken off in a great way in the small and medium-sized cities where land is available and people are able to construct their own housing. So that's the component that has picked up, which Whereas while CLSS is an important component and AHP also has picked up, but many of this new housing which is coming up in many cities is, and in Ahmedabad case, it is on urban periphery. And that is not being very congenial to low-income households to move out of the city because of their access to work, which gets disturbed. That was the case even in BSUP, and hence many of the BSUP housing did not pick up because of the peripheral location. So even if we have financial system in place, a very important component for the success of housing finance system put in place is a ground level reality of how these markets work. So that I agree with both the speakers, especially when Vermaji said about the importance of housing in the economy. I've been working on urbanization, and I know that urbanization and economic growth go hand in hand. India's success in urbanization is very, very strongly linked to housing sector, and the countries that have been able to handle access to housing to the working class, because they are the low-income migrants who come to the cities, and their housing taken care of pushes urbanization, industrialization, and urbanization much faster than what we have been able to do. And hence, there is a very big need of a systems approach for the bottom of the pyramid market, and that's I see there's a mismatch between the financial systems that are put in place and the requirements at the bottom of the market. The first and most important issue that is the bottleneck in expansion of this housing market at the bottom is access, availability of land for the housing in the cities. So financial systems have been put in place, but the land access and so that land markets are not sort of under control. The speculative land prices have really, in spite of all these efforts, have priced out a large segment which otherwise could have been in the market. Now, as we know that there's a very large bottom, and if that demand at that level increases, that's going to be a tremendous spurt of growth that we see. To be able to do that, there are new markets that need to be looked at, and financial systems need to also look at that. One is that there's a very large market of rental housing, which is 40%, even among the low-income households. And how and who is going to be, what is the institutional mechanism that's going to be reaching to this rentiers, or those who are looking for rental housing, not just in the middle and high income groups, but at the bottom. Currently, that rental market is has a characteristic of what we call shared renting. The multiple people tend to live in that shared housing. It's a dormitory kind of housing. And how do we create an institutional mechanism and financial system, which are the actors that are going to come, or institutions, the private sector is going to come in this segment, which is really a new product that needs to be thought of. Second is that we've been talking about supporting with fiscal instruments the employee or employer housing segment, which we have not yet tapped. We have had lip service to this in the early years in 1960s, 50s and 60s. We had schemes there, but I don't think that had picked up. But if that is there, if some kind of tax fiscal instruments are tied with this segment, that employers providing housing to their workers, that might actually boost industrial activity, because today in the cities we have a very peculiar situation that there is low migration to the cities. There is a labor shortage. The labor prices have gone up, but on the other hand, there's a massive unemployment in the rural sector. And so there's a mismatch of what the labor demand in the city and supply of the labor in the rural areas. And housing is one of the bottlenecks that is coming in the way of urbanization not picking up, and the success story of our urbanization and industrialization. So I think in the new industrial corridors and the industrial enclaves, one needs to be also thinking about products that support employer housing. Lastly, the housing segment, I think we've talked about the LIG and MIG, but there's much larger housing segment even below that, which is about 40 to 50% of urban population, which is a very large market. But we are not really having instruments to reach at that segment. And where I two specifically identified segment, the rental housing and employer housing, is something that we think is really important, needs to be thought of. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Darshni. Let me go on to Mr. Rangan. He's the executive director at the HDFC Bank. So, Mr. Rangan, please.
Thank you. I mean, after three eminent speakers have spoken about the subject, I think this relatively easy. I have to, but I would like to actually start with this thing that since the topic is about reviving the economy with housing, while everybody said it, the fact of the matter is that we used to talk about the 265 industries which are connected with housing, which get automatically sort of triggered as housing. So it's a very high sort of compounding growth which gives when a housing activity is triggered in the economy, and I think that has been accepted all over. And India, particularly, if you look at the demographics, the actually do a lot of housing and continue to have an economic growth come from there. We talked about the mortgage GDP ratio, which is just 10%. And if you look at the other economies, which are even closer economies, the mortgage to GDP ratio is well in excess of 20-25%. Even if you look at China, they are well off about 20%. And so if you really look at our growth in the GDP and the fact that we are only penetrated 10%, even if you have to go to a 15% growth over the next 5 or 6 years or 10 years, also growing alongside. So we are actually talking of huge numbers as far as the housing contribution is concerned, even to 15. While it may look to be a small number, but if you really in absolute terms, it's a very large number. The good part is that the industry has done extremely well, as everybody talked about, whether you want to look at it from the point of view of NPAs for the lenders in that segment. I think it has remained as one of the most resilient asset classes, where the NPA numbers are extremely low on the housing side, and that's the reason you see that more and more, whether it is housing finance companies or it is bank, everybody is actually housing. Another important thing is the Indian markets are unlike while housing is a long-term product, actually you don't require a long-term. This is because while long-term funding access may be a little bit of a challenge, because there are very few long-term lending institutions which can provide that sort of funding, but the sector itself doesn't require long-term funding, as the Indian the Indian consumer, when he actually takes a house and he takes a mortgage loan, there is a certain amount of prepayment which everybody does. If you go across the whole system, whether it is banking or housing finance companies, there is a 8 to 10% natural prepayment which everybody does, whether it is part or full, and that basically brings down the duration of the loan to less than 5 to 6 years, and which is easily fundable in terms of various sources of funding which is available in the country. It's one good thing that the mortgage, the one from our point of view, from a lender's point of view, it means a lot of churning. Shows that you don't have to take in serious asset liability mismatch, which was also being talked about. The other important thing is the affordability ratio. Over a period of time, we have seen that the affordability ratio in this segment, this sector, has increased tremendously, aided by the fact that the incomes have been going up, aided by the fact that the property prices have been coming down or has remained almost flat for so many years. So the affordability ratio, which normally is measured as the value of the property in relation to the annual income of the customer, it used to be in the range of 10 to 15 times if you go back in the history, and today we are talking about 3 to 4 times or up to 5 times being the value of a property which anybody has to buy in terms of his affordability index, and which is a very, very manageable index. Added to that, the most important thing is the interest rates. We have seen the interest rates coming down year on year, and today probably we are at an interest rate level which I have not in my history. I have been there in the housing finance system right from 83. I have not seen these interest rates in my lifetime. So the last saw the interest rate was around 7%. Now we are almost in terms of both the assets, in terms of servicing the loan and all that. The other important thing is the fiscal incentives. I think the government, as I said, considering that this industry is very important, we have seen over a period of time, year after year or a few years later, the fiscal benefits which are available on housing has been increased, whether it is reduction on housing loans, interest payments, whether it is reduction of the principal payments from the housing loans. All that is actually also helping the customers to bring down his outflow, aided by the fact that we talked about the CLSS scheme, where people have been able to get an upfront subsidy, and the scheme works extremely well. It almost works on a, in terms of just you file the eligibility of the various customers and the loans, and it gets processed and you get the money and you're able to pass it on to the individuals. I think over a period of time, the reforms have also come in, as was talked about RERA and other types of reforms. One of the important things which have been highlighted, which in fact I wanted to bring up, is this whole issue of rental housing. Darshini talked about this rental housing. Rental housing is a very, very important component. While it is necessary that everybody has an aspiration, only that segment has to be catered. There is a very large segment which is waiting in the rental housing. Now, there are a lot of these overseas funds which are very, very actually acquire housing and use it for rent housing. To my mind, I think one of the things needs to be looked at for rental housing is that today, if you look at house of income, it gets taxed under the, and at that head, against the income which you are getting from the house property, deduction against the interest is actually capped. Earlier, there was no cap on the interest actually. Now the interest has been capped to 200,000. So I think rental housing, which I think we should be, because it will very fast, and it will sanity the property prices and others, because these come to buy these properties, they will negotiate the prices and they will actually provide the funding, and the projects will also get completed in the process. So it is necessary to real this interest deduction, particularly if it is a rental house by a or fund player, or whether it is done by individuals in their own team play. The deduction on account of loans taken for buying a rent, that reduction should be relooked at. And important thing is that we're all talking about the corresponding infrastructure. What has really helped housing is that while we're looking at housing in a very isolated manner, what happens that on the side, whether it's transport has been one of the very, very important sort of initiatives which has been taken by many state governments, metro, or whether it is mass urban transportation. They have the city to actually go beyond and also enable the people to actually look at and buy this housing. I must also share this data that while we have long, even today, if you look at incremental housing which we put out, is almost 80% of the housing is actually new housing. So there is a very small amount of resale. So that really goes to prove that the inherent demand is very high. there is a lot of demand which still needs to be fulfilled before people can actually go and start buying resale properties more or add more properties as part of the second property thing. So the of course in recent past, I must say that this is one of the industry which has actually come back very fast. If you go back to this COVID period, I mean, while in the month of September, for example, we could see that the demand has actually come back very seriously, and the month of September we could actually do disbursement which were as a growth to the previous year actually, and that trend is now continuing. And so it's not that the demand is actually it's a sort of a leftover demand during this period. We believe that it is a very fundamentally a very strong demand is there in the economy and in the system, and this will have to be fulfilled by various players, whether it is housing finance companies or by the banks. And so I think I would I would like to stop here and maybe answer other things as they come in on a question answer session. Thank you.
I think this is a perfect discussion that we have had on housing. Very interesting. Now, what I'm going to do is I have a few thoughts in my mind. I'm just going to share those thoughts. And now each panelist has heard each other. So I'm going to go second round with each of the panelists. If they want to take a minute or two and react to each other or add to their initial comments, they're welcome. And then we will take the question answers. I'm sure there are many questions. We have an audience where many learned people have joined us today on this sector. So we're going to have quite a few questions. Now, the thoughts that I had was, look, when we are talking of reviving the economy and we are on the verge of the budget being formulated, and the ideas that we have today probably will find their way in the budget if they are cogent. The thought is to revive the economy, we need some demand. And I find in India, reverse mortgage is not there at all, though the banks are permitted to do reverse mortgage. So any thoughts that how can we do and what can we do with the reverse mortgage so that the elderly have cash in their hand, they have liquidity, they can start spending, they have the only asset, the shelter on their head, and just emotional attachment that my son or daughter will get the inheritance and these children are abroad in the US, Europe, or anywhere and they're not going to come back. So is there any way we can think together and the government could incentivize the reverse mortgage? The other idea is, and Mr. Rangan rightly said, that there is lots of money waiting to come into the housing market in the country. It's a potential. It's not developed at all. And therefore, there is an expectation that they will come. My thought is the existing housing stock, which is lying there, people's investment in the second and third house, not for living, but only for investment purposes, lying locked under the fear that if we rent it, it may not come back or somebody may misappropriate the house. Is there a possibility of having a special purpose vehicle which can take over this sitting existing stock and start renting, so the person who owns it gets some income stream and the government, the defense personnel, the banking, transferable jobs people, they can then address this risk averse people and probably get these houses on lesser loan? Is there a way to start reviving that segment of the society, of the housing sector? The third issue is, and this I find it very interesting, and Professor Darshini, I have been listening to you and thinking about this whole area. With COVID having taken place and people used to working from home, sitting, when it started, I could never imagine that I can sit locked in a house for 1 week. That was never a part of my DNA. But then we lived and sat in a single house for such a long time. Now, would we now need new housing schemes where, like a hotel, one floor will be dedicated to business floor and people need not go to their workplace, but they can rent a room or a table or a conference room in that business floor and then work from home. And this business floor will have all the facilities that in a hotel a business room has. So is there going to be a spurt and new type of housing in the country when urbanization is taking place? Also, when people are starting to work from home and extensively that they've got used to it for 1 year, is the Indian housing system going to move to the Western style housing system where kitchen is a very small, compact part of the house, but a working room within the house is a bigger place? So the catering happens from outside and not cooking inside the house. So with these few preliminary thoughts, I'll just let the panelists talk for a minute or two to each other's opinion or their first reactions before we open the house. This time we will follow the reverse pattern. I'll request Mr. Rangan to start the second round, followed by Professor Darshini, followed by Madam Dakshita, and then Mr. Verma. So, Mr.
Yeah,
Rangan,
thank you, sir.
please.
Thank you, sir. So I will respond. I think you have rightly said about this housing where it can be used both for as a place of work as well as a place of living, smaller living, and this thing. This is what exactly I was saying when I was saying that the funds are waiting to invest in rental properties. It is not just simply rental. They are talking about something like a full serviced apartments. So in fact, the funds are willing to actually take a full building, not necessarily few flats, but the full building, and then convert them into serviced apartments, which would obviously cater to everything what you talked about. So while whether it is smaller kitchens or whether it is fully serviced sort of workplace, all that will be part of that. So that is something which is not just a concept, but it's actually waiting to come in. I'm sure that if we put our minds to what is really required to sort of incentivize or build up on that, I think that will be it will be very good for the country going into the long term. The second, I just want to sort of comment on that reverse mortgage. In fact, we had worked very hard on this reverse mortgage with NHB, and in fact, there are some tax sort of clarifications also which were brought in this thing. I think there are still a certain amount of while the product has been rolled out by some of them, but the acceptability has not been so great. I think we need to revisit this. You are very right. We need to revisit this whole product. We are seeing a lot of these people, moving to elderly homes and all that stuff. I'm sure that a lot of them may want to stay in the same house and then, give it back after their lifetime. I think we need to revisit the provisions, because a lot of provisions have undergone a change, whether it is stamp duty, whether it is taxation, whether it is yields and all that. So I think we need to revisit this existing provisions which are there and which needs to be amended quite quickly, so that this market eventually will get opened up, as more and more people are now looking at even elderly homes and all. I think this will also be one of the products which will be needed by the society at some point in time. You are very right, sir.
Yeah, let me respond to some of the comments that I see in the chat, as well as what Professor Singh said. And also I agree with Mr. Rangan about the linkage between housing and transport sector. Because to expand the demand of housing, which is going on the periphery of sprawling cities, or the new idea of transit-oriented development, which is also linked to high-density housing along the transit routes, and at least the metropolitan cities are getting new transport or transit, public mass transit options. So that is an area which is is the future area where there would be interaction of housing and transport sector. We need to look at that part of it as to what is the kind of housing that is coming up in the TOD, transit oriented zones, that are being transit-oriented development or transit-oriented zones, whatever that's called, which is important. Currently, our sense is that it is still middle-income housing that's coming up, whereas the demand that we have is at the bottom, which is LIG and EWS, as somebody has put it in the chat. And my concern is I've been working on the EWS segment, and the idea is to how do you get them into the market and build affordable housing in that segment, which is 35 square meter or less than 15 lakh housing. And that is entirely going to be on the periphery of the cities. And that's where the transport is going to be very, very important. Housing is going to be important as also in COVID times, because the problem has been that there are people who don't have house or living in extremely high density areas where they're more vulnerable to any COVID or any other future epidemics that are expected to come in. How do we deal with it within the low income settlements? Would there be common workshop areas or common areas for home-based work, etc.? Because there are large segments of population which are also engaged in home-based work and so on. And we need to sort of reimagine housing market from again, and it brings in this varied kinds of markets into our understanding, because after all, the current policy understanding and the reforms that have been done reaches the MIG and then penetrates down a little bit to LIG. But the future is going to be LIG, EWS, where massive housing requirement is going to be there. And if that is met, it is going to have both spillover and spillover, both effects on both consumption and production side. I think we still need to crack that market and understand how do we bring our financial products down to that segment.
So can I enter now? Yeah. So I have to put a few things into perspective. First of all, what liquidity and the rate at which liquidity is available right now, it's as Mr. Rangan has also said, it's literally one of the best eras for anybody who's wanting to pick up money. Secondly, this comes on the back of the 2018 crisis, which hit the sector, where for a few, for a little gain, there was a lot of tweaking of not passing down the benefit by the companies to the various individual home loan owners or claimants. Now, what has happened post-IL&FS? Housing finance companies have adjusted their ALM by replacing almost 1 lakh crore of CPs by longer term, either bank or NHB refinance or by NCDs. Further, if we talk at the bottom of the pyramid, NHB is offering cheaper refinance under AHF to all individual house loans to EWS, that is income up to 3 lakhs, and the present rate is 3%. And that's fairly low. So the funding is there. The funding is there. So I come back to my original, I know I spoke perhaps in a very limited manner, but my point was that the policy is there, the funds are there. And as I said earlier, to repeat, the marriages happen between banks and the housing finance companies. I think it's more for the sector to rise up. And there is going to be a problem if you're only going to focus on completing ongoing projects, post-RERA, GST, fund availability, then as I think most of us have agreed on, the demand is going to be much more. And Dr. Singh, your point about the second and third house and the SPV to take over to, so that a rental income accrues, I think it's a good idea. It's a business model which somebody has to pick up. It gives revenue flows and it keeps security of house ownership with the elderly or the aged. Typically, India is moving towards a situation of extremely nuclear families. And Indians, we are known to invest in. So perhaps it's a good idea. But like as Rangan pointed out, for reverse mortgage, the sentiment perhaps didn't pick up. I mean, you find everybody, whether it's SBI, whether it's a PSBs, where everybody, there are a lot of schemes running, but there are too many disclaimers also in the market. Be careful before you take reverse mortgage. So in that sense, these are concepts for which a lot of advocacy will be required. My point is very limited, that you have the money, you have the availability of low credit, and government has addressed the lowest, the bottom of the pyramid. It has addressed LIG, it has addressed MIG, and perhaps the the upper class may not need that kind of handholding. So if you put all of this together, I think the time more now is for the recalibration of the kind of schemes, the kind of policies, the kind of product which people will be offering now, which will be offered to the people. Also, I have an issue here. I feel that there is a case where we need to broad base the availability of housing away from the so-called GQ and go into other areas. Suburban transport, as a very, very valid point picked up by Mr. Rangan, that these are all very important areas which should be suburban transport availability means that there is going to be a lot of economic development in other areas. And I think that, yes, this should be the new way to go. Thank you.
Mr. Charanji, I'm coming in. So first on your point of reverse mortgage, I think that's something which deserves to be promoted. We had done, when the NHB had introduced this particular program of reverse mortgage, it was done after a lot of deliberations with the industry, with all the other stakeholders. We had got a report done on the psychology of the people and the customs and the doubts, if any. So based on that, a limited exercise had been initiated, and it went off the ground. It was received well by the people who needed it. We were keen that at least this product should be available on the shelf. It may or may not be required by the people, but those who require it will be able to use it. So this had actually the partnership. It was the tripartite partnership. The individual who is going to be the borrower or the beneficiary of the reverse mortgage scheme, one. Number two, the lender, the bank or the housing finance company who would be taking on the credit risk. And three, the insurance company who will be taking on the longevity risk. So this product is essentially parceled out amongst different institutions who are best known for mitigating or for addressing their respective risks. So we had a good offtake of about, I still remember, about 2,000 crores worth of reverse mortgage was done, and it involved both banks and the housing finance companies community. Later, the insurance company, I think we need to really push them, and the annuity market. Essentially, it becomes annuity, which comes in the hands of the individuals. And one was, we had a special dispensation from the government on exemption of annuity from income tax for the individuals as it was for the senior citizens. So that was a big achievement, and the government's very considerate, in fact, policy on promoting this through income tax exemption. The annuity which was coming from the insurance companies, that's where a little bit of disconnect lay, and we couldn't go past the insurance company. We had initially some insurance companies who came on board and they were engaged on this product, but later maybe they developed a cold feet because this product was not very well known to them. The regulator also was not very forthcoming and upfront on this, like the IRDAI, which I should frankly say here. So maybe some kind of revisit, and I'm sure revisit through the banks and the HFCs who are aware about this product. But since a lot of time has been lost, so there is a need to get all the stakeholders on board and get them to act together. And the most important piece here would be the insurance company and the insurance regulator. Insurance regulators should support the insurance companies who are coming forward, because they have to get their product approved by the regulator. And if there is any doubt, I think there should be some kind of regulators exchange of views to have greater comfort among them. So it was kind of not really stalled, but it didn't go off on in the manner we thought it would. And there's still a lot of queries, and people are anxious about this product, and there are a lot of families who need the support of this reverse mortgage. So short point is that here we need to take up, revisit again. The product is great, and I think there are a lot of takers for it. It will do a lot of good to a lot of families and people. It was a very imaginative product, and industry took it very well, except for that disconnect with the insurance company and the regulator, which will need to be pushed forward. Number two, on the issue of housing, I have a firm view that the housing needs to be decentralized. We need to have, and that's what I think Rangan also mentioned when he talked about, and Darshaniji, about the transportation arrangements or outside the city, suburban connectivities, etc. I would go a point beyond that. We should have intercity, we have industrial corridors, you have highways which are running across states, interstate corridors, etc. You have housing alongside. You have housing alongside that will provide so much of synergy in terms of using and consumption of infrastructure, using and consumption of power, sanitation, sewage, because you have the infrastructure available for the development of the industrial corridors, and same can be shared by the households who are going to stay there. The industrial corridors are going to generate economic activity in the local areas, and that's where the people would be attracted, and let them be there rather than migrating to the cities. So one, you'll have a decongestion of the city, you'll have a reverse urbanization, you'll be developing certain areas which are, you'll be decentralizing growth, you'll be decentralizing population, and you'll be decentralizing housing. And you'll be basically using the synergies of the available resources and the infrastructure, which are in any case rare in our country and which are very costly. So you'll be using all that in a very synergistic manner. So while we do, extra city infrastructure or transportation connectivities or provide housing on the periphery, we should also look at the possibility of developing housing along the industrial corridors, etc., which will keep the people in the area they live. And post-COVID scenario, we have already seen that people may become very averse to migration. People may become averse to migrating to cities. So there should be an effort towards developing economic activities, generating housing along in the areas where the people are living in, and which will indirectly also develop the area. It will develop the local resources, the GDP, and it will also develop local housing and income for the people. Number three was on the partnership, and which Dakshita, you mentioned about the partnership between the banks and the housing finance companies. That's a great point. And I think the housing finance companies have skills and capabilities, expertise in handling mortgage-related issues. Banks have the benefit of low-cost funds, and they have diversified funding sources, etc. So banks funding the housing finance companies is fine, but at the same time, there has to be a platform where they are able to partner in, and they're able to synergize their respective skills and specialities. Bank specialty being funding, and the HFC specialty being having the knowledge and expert knowledge and experience of the sector. There is a need for combining the two. Co-lending is one area, but I think there has to be some more magnified aspect of it, where it's a co-lending, co-sharing of the risk, etc. And there is constant, I would say, exchange of experience, and also cross-fertilization between the banks and the housing finance company. That's one area of partnership. Other area of partnership would be, I think, the public-private partnership in housing construction. So that's an area which is very, very important, where apart from the private builders, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks also, that there is a need to promote the participation of the public housing agencies now, who are already established, but they are really out of business, in the sense that with the reform process, the construction industry was promoted, the private sector participation, the public housing agencies were put to the background. Now this is a time to really reactivate them and get them into providing housing for the low and economically weaker section housing. That's an area which I think the private developers we have tried enough with them, but the kind of the magnitude or the traction which is required there is just not forthcoming. So that's eminently an area which belongs in the space of the public housing agencies. So that partnership between the public and the private sector partnership is important. Third, partnership is between the union government and the state governments. Now, there are a lot of areas in the housing sector which are squarely in the space of the state government. There's registration, stamp duty, land management, as Darshaniji mentioned about it's not only financing. More critical at times is the availability of land, management of land, providing infrastructure on that, getting the approvals, efficient construction. So all that is within the domain of the state government. Now, state government, central government can give guidelines. They can encourage the state government to have state housing policies. But there has to be some mechanism by which there is a standing arrangement of relationship or interaction between the union government and the state government in the field of housing and not so much housing finance. Housing finance is a central government subject anyway. So there is a disconnect between housing finance and housing construction, because housing finance is under the central government, which gets directed very well in tune with the reforms with the overall financial market. But the housing construction, where the reform process has to be activated and which has to be really brought on par with the reforms of the financial sector. So that partnership between central and the state government is important. And we're talking about the state government, it is essentially the state government and the local bodies, local authorities who are in charge of giving the approvals, who are in charge of providing the infrastructure, who are in charge of providing the connectivities. So that kind of partnership is, again, very, very important. On funding part, yes, we have, there's no dearth of funds. There's enough liquidity in the market. But in the present scenario, there is certainly a slowdown amongst the lenders. They perceive higher risk. And post-COVID scenario, since we have had so many rounds of forbearance on repayment by the individuals, which has now, of course, been stopped now. And I think going forward, next year is going to be a challenge. But we are very encouraged to see that the offtake of individual housing loans is been very good, and it has really taken off the ground, and it's going to reach the pre-COVID period very soon, as Rangan also mentioned. And HDFC's figures and the numbers are showing very good results. So are the banks. Banks are still bullish on housing finance, and that's where a lot of work has been done by the regulator, which has given them this confidence, because despite the rest of the economy not doing so well, they are still bullish on housing finance. So, well, with this, I would stop here. I don't have anything else to say.
We'll open the house for questions. Professor Swami has put some on the chat. Professor Swami, if your questions have been answered, it's okay. If not, please go ahead and ask your question now.
Thank you, Gerard sir, for this very nice, insightful this seminar webinar which you organized. On the outset, I feel that slightly this panel was leaned towards the demand side of the housing sector. We did not have any representatives or panelists from the industry, particularly the developer side or the builder side, so that we could have heard from them what are the constraints in providing the required supply, what has been demanded by the sector. Okay, anyway, my first question goes to Professor Darshini, as we claim that she's working in that area. We all agree that there have been several reform measures to boost the demand side of the housing sector in India, of course. However, there has been unanimity on the views that measures are required to boost the supply side of the housing sector. So what are your views on affording housing space in India, both from the demand side as well as supply side, particularly from the supply side, that to keeping in view the rural areas, because we feel that there has been a steady rise in the rural incomes in the recent past. So anyway, the demand side is well taken, but how is the supply side addressed by the required from the required agencies or the governments or the policymakers?
I would suggest we will take a few questions, and then the panelists can choose which one to answer. And if there will be consensus, we will go beyond 7. Otherwise, we'll close at 7. So if there are any other questions, I would request this is the time to ask. You can just unmute yourself and ask the question directly to the panelists. And anyone could do it, or You could just write it in the chat box and I can read it for you, whatever is the preferred mode.
I have one more question, but should I take it later, sir?
Please go ahead now.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Rangan, anyway, he represents the HDFC and he is also in touch with the industry, that is the developers and all. So that's why I thought he may address this question. India's urban housing space is primarily being driven by the EWS and also the LIG sectors categories. An analysis of the demand supply shows that on an average, annual demand is about 0.6 million houses, the top 8 cities versus a supply of just a meager 0.2 million homes per year. So what are the bottlenecks basically that are coming in the way of meeting that rising demand? Can the recently launched lighthouse projects in the 6 states can provide some more vibrancy, and can it be taken up in a big way in the coming days so that this kind of a rising demand can be met? How do you analyze this demand and supply factors, particularly in the context of these projects?
Anyone else would like a question, please?
Good evening, Dr. Charan Singh, and then all the experts. Yeah, from Subramanian of RBI, ex-RBI, and happy Pongal greetings to everyone, and a happy New Year, and an excellent presentation by all the speakers. That is number one. Number two is that I felt the smart cities are coming up. The projects all for development of infrastructure in urban areas. So naturally, that will help boost requirement of residential apartments with better facilities. And then have you included this fact, all these, like HDFC and then other agencies, this fact into your future projects and projections, so that will be more amenable and useful to you with these smart cities, because water and other facilities are coming in a large way. Naturally, that we should be able to see. And then how do you proceed? How you propose to take this fact into account so that lending policies also slightly are twisted towards that? Thank you very much.
You know, I had one question based on what Professor Darshini observed and my own reading, that there is huge demand at the LIG and EWS sector. Now, given COVID, given that unemployment is on the increase, given that the poverty levels will increase, now Mr. Rangan says that in his lifetime, he had never seen interest rate plummet so low. He's right. But in 4 lifetimes, there has never been anything like what COVID has brought to us. Now, given these 2 scenarios, my question is, and this goes to basically Mr. Verma and Madam Dakshita, can we conceive that housing sector, which has forward-backward linkages with nearly 275 industries, and if we kickstart the housing sector, the economy starts moving, construction activity happens, employment happens, and thereby they create income and they create ripples in the economy. Is it possible to conceive a still lower rate of interest for that segment of the society which can produce EWS and LIG housing? Means I would not be surprised if I had to take a commercial wholesale picture and say that loans for EWS and LIG will be at 0 rate of interest, because they are going to kickstart the economy and I will recover from those loans which other industries will engage in. Of course, a single commercial bank can't afford it. It's impossible. But I'm now thinking, while listening to the panel, that is there a way that we could conceive something like this? I'm sorry if it's a naive question, but if it could revive the economy, probably it is worth it. There are no more questions. So there is a question which has come from Professor Swami for Professor Darshini and Rangan, and my question for the 2 regulators. With this, I'll leave it to the panelists. In the order they want to, I would request Professor Darshni to respond first, Mr. Rangan to respond second, Madam Dakshita to respond third, and Mr. Verma to respond fourth. And with that, we will then close our session. Professor Darshni, please.
Yeah, so Professor Swami has asked a very interesting question. I can speak for an hour on the answer to that question because actually what he's talking about is he's asking for revisiting the model of urbanization as to, and I think Mr. Verma adhered to it, that do we look at urbanization where we have people coming to large cities and continue with that form of urbanization, or decentralize it to small and medium towns where I think the land prices are still affordable and where the supply side mechanisms could be easier to manage because the land prices are less. In urban areas, in large cities, the supply side mechanism in the housing sector, especially in the land segment, is extremely complex. And we've done extensive studies on, especially in the informal housing markets, what are the land arrangements. And there's no simple and easy answer to untangling the land ownership regimes and situation in this market, which is basically the bottom 40 to 50% of the market that is there in large cities. So firstly, if we reimagine the model of urbanization that we would like to have, which is could then lead to more planned interventions, and where we would be able to look at, especially, and I repeat this point, that we need to look at the land markets at the bottom in terms of the ownership and transfer and other regulations which are there. I'm not telling that land markets need to be completely deregularized because otherwise it will be mayhem. There will be no control on how land market will operate. So we need to do something at the for land to address the supply side. And that's been a nagging issue in not just India, but if you look at studied in Brazil and other countries, it's the land question that has been more complex than financing question for at least the bottom of the market. And that's a very, very large market, and it's going to expand. And as I said, if we are going to be successful in our urbanization, that's the market that's going to expand. So you could have decentralized urbanization, you could have corridor-led urbanization, you could have different forms of urbanization that would make some of this happen. We had earlier we had idea about rural urbanization, that can infrastructure and industrial investments and other happen in large villages or small towns. And I think repeatedly we do and invoke China example of what they've done with their urbanization is they started with the rural urbanization of pushing investments into the small towns and villages and that's the strong base of economic growth that was created. Now, our ex-president, President Kalam, had initiated this idea of Pura, of creating infrastructure in large villages around urban amenities in rural areas. But I somehow, at the implementation level, we are not able to do. And also, I think somebody referred to decentralized urbanization, to giving more powers to the state in implementing, because finally land legislation is a state subject. And if there's more flexibility of implementing some of the programs that are coming from the national government and have more facilitative arrangements on land, I think we may be able to look at the supply side, facilitate the supply side in the housing segment.
So may I respond on some of the things? So I'll try on some of the points made. While we talked all about demand side and finance, there was nobody to represent the side. All that I can say is that with a lot of
Rangan can't hear you.
Mr. Rangan, we lost you when you were talking about the supply side, saying that we do talk to some of the developers. Do you want to complete your answer? We lost you after that. We are not able to hear you, Mr. Rangan.
2-3 things I wanted. One is remind
Can I suggest Madam Dakshita to respond? When Mr. Rangan's connection comes back, we will request him to
I
complete
have
his. Oh, okay. Welcome back. Welcome back. Mr. Rangan, you could complete your
Yeah.
response.
I'm just trying to unmute actually. I don't know. Hello. I'm
We can hear you.
hello. Hello. Sorry, I was not able to unmute this whole thing. Am I audible now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you are
So
audible.
I just left developers. So we do interact with the developers. All that I can share a bit of information is that this industry has been largely unregulated for quite a long time, and in the last few years we have seen the emergence of regulation and sector is the RERA and all other legislation which have been done around it. So the key and also movement for the FSI and many other this thing which have also been increasing over period. This industry has had its own. I think RERA coming, the stage at which you can launch the project, at least from some perspective, a lot of confidence will be to be built in before he actually enters in the development. And then there is a focus of his problems also. So to my mind, I think the supply side transformed from and we should see a larger once the existing supply of the be able to see a lot of new construction coming in. And just give you one idea about you talked about the rural and segment housing. All that I can say HDFC we operate across the whole of India, and while the other markets still some of the these and all, Our average loan if you is 24. Convert that into a cost of the property, saying that if you are financing say 70% of the cost of the house, we're talking about house properties where between to 60 lakhs to 100 lakh rupees. So that's what we are talking about overall, which is occurring in the whole segment. But if you address the low segment of the society and also to see whether what Mr. Charan Singh was saying, whether we really deliver something at a zero rate of interest. The CLSS benefit and other benefit, the rate goes further down. Yes, of course, from here to zero will be a walk which has to be done along with other cities or other programs which we can, which will have to be worked government and. But some sections, everything are being directly given to the credit of the individual. And it's a thought which I think it's a very relevant. One can work on that. On the smart cities, there was a question, and that is are a concept which is it had to pick things like that. So yes. So I have done.
So I would now request Madam Dakshita, if she can. Madam Dakshita, can you please?
So I have actually again it's like almost like putting everything together what has been said. Yes, we say that the liquidity is there. However, the liquidity for the really
Sir, I
lower
finished.
end
Yeah.
in the pyramid has to be brought down lower than say the 3% which is being offered for for affordable housing. And that, as Rangan has already said, will be a walk which will have to be from 3 to 0% will be a tough one. The other thing is this, that if you are going to have a supply made available of absolutely low cost homes in the urban areas, then we are not going to find enough products available due to the economics behind it. So therefore, one of the suggestions which has come in earlier regarding rental homes, maybe that's going to be the solution to take care of the bottom end of the pyramid. Until income's built up and until I, I don't think that the economics will support this idea. Thank you. That's from me. Mr. Varma.
Yes, yes, Charanji. In fact, I'm not quite in agreement with your suggestion, and for the following reasons. One is we have already seen that when the funds are to be made available at artificially low rates, you'll not get enough funds. So you are running a problem of cost of funds versus volume of funds. If the subsidies, to the extent government can subsidize, it's fine. But really traveling to zero rate of interest is not something that we should advocate, for the reason that there would be limitation. You cannot stretch the funds to be lent at 0% indefinitely. So there'll be a limit. If and when you are funding a large segment of the population, flow of funds is important. The involvement of the lending agencies is important. The government subsidy is to the extent that people can somewhat you can ease up their problem. And we have seen a number of studies by the Reserve Bank of India also, where actually more than the cost of funds is the timely delivery of credit. More disciplined way of lending by the lenders is more important. So that ensures volume of funds. Having said that, I would agree with you that there is a need for market segmentation. You need to have a well segmented market where you have different strategies and different products for different market segments. The lowest segment of the market should be subsidy supported. Higher segments of the market have to be market supported. There has to be a segment in between, which is a combination of both subsidy and the market. So today we are at a fairly low rate of interest, and under the CLSS, the extent of subsidy is fairly good. We really need to step on the gas there and see to what extent the funds can be lent out to these people. And zero rate of interest actually has a moral hazard issue also, where people feel that it's grant or it's close to grant, there is no cost involved in that. So alternate use of funds. The funds, instead of going for housing, it may go somewhere else, and then eligibility becomes important. Your housing shortage remains the same. So that may not be a very prudent and sound way to really strategize our solution around that, because the volumes are big and numbers are very, very large. So, but I agree with you, to the extent possible, we have to soften the impact of the cost of funds. More important is where I would agree with Darshini ji, that we, on the real issue side, real sector side, real economy, where the provision of land, even if you are given subsidized funding to these people, now they have to have a house which involves land, which involves construction, which involves infrastructure, which involves approval. And large segment of these people are in the informal sector. That's something which we have missed talking about. There's a growing informal sector, and where their flexibility of income, they don't have a timely delivery of income. There is uncertainty around the income, and the properties also may be informal. So which happens in the slums. Now, counterpart of the slums in the rural areas is where people are residing on a piece of land for a very long period of time. What is the status of that land? What is the land use norms for that? So those are the other real economy related issues, which are very important to handle, because it shouldn't so happen that while you have applied the funds, they have been given the land, etc., and eventually they do construction, and that is treated as illegal down the road. So that will be extremely tragic. So we have to really put our house in order in terms of the real estate side, the real sector side, where the provision of land and infrastructure to the large segments of the population is very, very important, where they find it very difficult to actually arrange all by themselves. So there has to be some kind of a state government support on the real estate side, on the real economy side, in terms of provision of land, title, etc., and on the financial sector side, where the funds are to be made available at subsidized rates. Only financing at subsidized rates may not be the end of the solution, end of the problem, but it's a combination of both, which is important. So that's where I would come from. The other aspect was regarding I just like to plug in one thought here is on housing being part of the city and urban planning, which Darshini also mentioned about. That's something very important, and we can't have housing in isolation from rest of the city development, from rest of the infrastructure development in the city. So it has to be part and parcel of the integrated development of the city, and that's where the concept of smart city and or Amrut or whatever these different designated schemes come in. So we have not really reached that stage. We have not gone past treating housing on a standalone basis and as part and parcel of the integrated development of the city, etc. That gets the game becomes more complex, but at the same time that's more sustainable. When you're looking at, say, solar energy, we are looking at green energy, we are looking at waste disposal, etc., and that has to be linked to housing. City infrastructure and housing have to be integrated well, and that's something which is still it could be work in progress, but that's the missing piece still. So that's an area of intelligence. I think the government would do well to really work on that and take it forward. On the long-term funds, Rangan had a point. We need to develop a long-term market for long-term funds. Now, there's a need to channelize pension funds and the provident funds into housing. Government has tried a number of times, and we have seen there is a good amount of realization and awakening on that issue. But somehow we have not been able to really channelize pension and provident funds into housing in a big way. We had started with insurance funds, and where the insurance companies had were in fact mandated to provide at least certain percentage of their annual accretion into low-cost housing or social sector schemes, which included housing. But exclusively for housing, we have not had such a provision, and the government does talk about, in the national housing policy also does talk about long-term funding of housing through pension and provident funds. Securitization, so that's if the government is looking at certain areas to promote housing, I think this could as well fit in there in terms of promoting channelizing pension and provident funds into housing. Other is on providing incentives to construction agencies, but that has to be very well guarded and very well supervised, where you are providing incentives to lenders. If the banks, which Charan, you have mentioned about providing low-cost funds or low lending rates to the EWS and LIG segment, to that extent, the lenders should be compensated by way of tax benefit, by way of tax incentives, by way of exemption of their income or profit out of lending to this segment, so they can lower the interest rates, lend there, but in turn their lending is viable, because after all they have to do risk-based pricing also. So if you want them to do at a very low rate of interest, good, well enough, I mean we should do that, but at the same time give them some kind of compensation in terms of maybe tax incentive on the kind of profit that they get out of lending to that segment. Similarly, incentive for construction of houses for that segment. I don't think we have come out very explicitly on such a tax regime or tax incentive structure for construction of housing for this segment of the population, and where the profits or the income generated out of this part of the business is exempted or to a certain extent exempted. So these two measures will, I think, eminently be a very good signal to the industry. It will be a very good thrust to housing. So these two tax measures, and along with that, some channelizing of long-term funds into the sector, and that being made available through the National Housing Bank to the housing finance companies and the banks in terms of their lending long. So they don't have to regret lending long with short-term funds and risking their asset liability mismatch. These three, and then of course we are now pretty, I think, in a good spot on securitization, but some kind of government support would be important in terms of nudging the authorities or the stakeholders to push forward the securitization, which will itself take into account or generate a lot of liquidity. Government may not have to come in, RBI may not have to come in. The kind of assets that we have today, 18 trillion INR 18 lakh crores, if it's sitting in the balance sheet of the housing finance companies and the banks, if they are securitized even a small portion of that, that is immediate liquidity. Apart from addressing the asset liability mismatch also. So some kind of a government nudge or intent or statement on pushing securitization will be very, very important. Other aspect where, if it's from the tax or budget point of view, some kind of a nudge to the lenders or to the regulators on doing something on valuation. I think valuation, to my mind, is could be villain of the piece going forward. In case the sector starts seeing a lot of uncertainties and volatilities, I think the valuation could be the villain of the piece. So that's something which we need to address right upfront, and it will be a very proactive intervention by way of the regulators coming, or the government may say that, because government is so deep into housing sector today, that they should be also concerned about other nuances of housing and the regulations and the risk embedded therein. So some kind of an intent on formalizing or standardizing the valuation, so that different lenders don't value their own way, or different valuers don't value their own way. There's some kind of good standard built on that. So that would be a very important signal. Other than that, of course, the international financial institutions who are lending long should be encouraged to come into India, and they've had a good experience. We have good assets, good originating standards. As Rangan also mentioned, that the NPA is just above 1%. Of course, it's expected to go up now in post-COVID scenario. But overall, the quality of assets is good. It's a very well-regulated industry, and there is no reason why it shouldn't be good to attract investments from outside, both from external investors as well as from external lenders. So I'll leave it at that.
I just have one final thing I want to say. Let's not forget, we are speaking housing here. Housing is an asset. Therefore, lending is a more secure business here. Actually, we have to see it in that context. We are not talking real estate per se. We are talking a very specific segment, which is housing. So frankly, my feel is that if liquidity is available in the market, long-term liquidity is there, ALM mismatches have been addressed. I think now it is the time for the product and the sector to grow. The stone is already set.
I want to thank each one of you. I'm really also happy that though my question was very naive on the zero rate of interest for the LIG, I do understand, I am a banker myself. How do you afford a zero rate of interest? But then I do think that with the forward-backward linkages, maybe at least to the people who are for this 2-year period, which we are in post-COVID, when we are going to have many people unemployed and in poverty line, we could think of a direct benefit transfer to compensate for the rate of interest which this LIG family might have incurred. That could be one way out so that we kickstart the economy. But in general, having a zero rate of interest on housing loan, I think is not the right thing. It'll have lots of moral hazard problems and should not be entertained. I totally agree with this. There have been a number of suggestions made today. I think it's one of the best discussions on housing sector that we have had today. I want to thank each one of the panelists. At such a short notice, this was conceived. This was actually conceived just 3 days back when I contacted each one of you, and I'm really fortunate that each one of you agreed to it. But the richness of the discussion reflected the vast experience that each one of you had in the sector. And I think this is a long way it will go, and I'm sure the government will benefit from the discussion that we have had today. Pre-budget or post-budget, this discussion will go a long way. Let me thank each one of the participants to have spared a Friday evening with us, just post Lodi and post the Makar Sankranti. They have been with us, spending time with us, and each of the panelists to have agreed once again. Thank you very much, and look forward to the session next Friday. Next Friday, we have another great session on banking. This session is being addressed by Madan Sabnavis. He has just come out with a book on banking. which was for the last 25 years a sort of a aerial review which he has done. And we will have 2 CMDs discussing that book with him, and I'll be moderating that session. I invite all of you for Madan Sabnav's session next Friday, same time, 5:30, in the EGROW Knowledge Webinar Series. Thank you once again. Good
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Chiranjeev. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah.